Welcome back to Gerodynamics. Okay, so I want to do another political video. So let's see, what other hot topic is there right now? Let's talk about packing the court. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read this from the Democracy docket of all places. But on Tuesday, May 16th, so yesterday, a group of U.S. Senate and House Democrats reintroduced the Judiciary Act of 2023, a bill that would add 4 seats to the U.S. Supreme Court, bringing the bench from 9 to 13 justices. Okay, so they are calling it expanding the court. What it has traditionally been called is packing the court. So, what they would like to do is increase the size of the court with their own appointed justices, of course. So that's called packing the court. They're calling it expanding the court because it has a nicer connotation to it. Packing the court has historically been unpopular. I believe the last polling I saw was somewhere between 20 and 30% support packing the court, whereas a large number, a much larger number oppose it. Okay, so they want to call it expanding the court. I get that. All right, you want to try to make it a little more appealing. But what I don't accept and is not okay is that they try to justify it by saying that it's Donald Trump that was packing the court. That's not true historically or just factually. That's not true. Donald Trump didn't pack the court. He nominated justices to replace current justices, which is his power. And then the House and the Senate approved them, which is the way that is supposed to work. That is the normal process. The only reason that they say that he packed the courts is because they oppose who he put on the courts. So let's take a look at that. Probably the most controversial one, although that's debatable because they tried to make them all controversial, is Neil Gorsuch. Is the first justice that he appointed to the Supreme Court. Neil Gorsuch replaced Scalia on the court. So let's take a look at that. Why is it then controversial that he had Neil Gorsuch nominated to replace, and they replaced Scalia? Because Scalia passed away towards the end of Barack Obama's presidency. And so the Democrats believed that Barack Obama should have been able to fill that seat. So let's take a look at that. Barack Obama, it was an election year, and Barack Obama was nominating a gentleman by the name of Merrick Garland, who we have become more familiar with in recent years. Um, and so he wanted to take someone who was one of, if not the most conservative, originalist, whatever you want to call it, thinkers on the Supreme Court with one of the most liberal, one of the most what's the word where they think it's a living document. They think the Constitution is a living document and can change with the times based on the way that it's implemented, as opposed to the actual original intent of the founders who authored the Constitution. Okay, so so what the Senate did, which was the Senate was being held by the Republicans at the time, they said, you know what? Nope, we're not going to approve this appointment, and they held off until Trump won the presidency, and and he was able to nominate and secure the seat for Gorsuch. Okay, so while I understand that they were upset, nothing illegal happened. Nothing inappropriate happened. The Barack Obama used his authority to appoint a nominee to nominate someone for the Supreme Court. The Senate used their authority to deny that appointment. All of that is perfectly acceptable within the confines of the Constitution and the law. So, who is in the wrong? Because no one did anything illegal, right? So who is in the wrong? Well, it did the Republicans used really stupid excuses for it. What they should have just done from the beginning was said, look, we're not going to approve this nomination. That's our power. That's our we have that right to not approve this nomination, and we're not going to do it. But what they said was something silly. They said that it's the last year of his presidency. It's an election year. We're not going to approve his appointment because we want to allow the next president to appoint the Supreme Court justice. That made almost no sense. I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now. I agree that the Senate had the authority to not approve the nomination. Not that that excuse makes any sense. But anyways, also, I think that if you're going to nominate somebody to replace one of the most conservative justices on the court, then it makes sense that the person, and mind you, Gorsuch is nowhere near the justice that Scalia was, but you have, a right to be able to nominate somebody who is more, quote unquote, right leaning, as opposed to someone who's extremely liberal like Merrick Garland. Okay. So I side with the choice to not approve Merrick Garland and to then wait until Gorsuch was nominated and to approve the Gorsuch nomination. Let's look back a little further, just to kind of give you an example, just some historical context. Prior to nominating Merrick Garland, Obama nominated Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, both of which were seated and are on the Supreme Court now, both of which replaced Stevens and Soter. Stevens, hey, maybe we're related. Both Stevens and Soter were nominated by Republican presidents, were members of the Republican Party, were seen as conservative throughout their lives, but then when they got to the Supreme Court, they were more, they sided with the liberal side of the Supreme Court more often than not. So you got to take this with a grain of salt. Did Barack Obama nominate people that he was more politically identified with? Yes. Did he nominate two people who align with the justices that they were replacing? Kind of. I would say they are definitely more extremist left than the two that they replaced. But the two that they replaced, even though they had both been nominated by Republican presidents and seemed to be conservative heading into it, at the time that they were replaced, were more on the liberal side of the court. So, it is what it is. The Supreme Court basically didn't tilt at all, right? So it didn't change the makeup of the court. The court didn't change. The makeup of the court also didn't change when Gorsuch was placed on the court, because Scalia was more right-leaning. Gorsuch hopefully is more right-leaning, although, he's been kind of hit and miss. But most of the Supreme Court justices are hit and miss. You can never guarantee just because someone is a right-leaning justice or because a Republican nominated them or a Democrat nominated them that they will vote along those lines. That's part of being a justice. They take each case as a case-by-case basis, and they don't base it on their political identities. Okay, so next. So I agree with Trump putting Gorsuch on the court. I think that was the appropriate thing to do. There's no packing there. Democrats are upset about it, but they had to move on. Next, Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh was replacing Kennedy. Kennedy was a relatively conservative man, more of the right wing of the court. And actually, just one moment, pause. Sorry, I did want to confirm that. Yes, he was more conservative. He was not a 100% conservative. Again, none of them really are 100% conservative, 100% liberal. But he was more ideologically right-leaning. Also, Brett Kavanaugh happened to clerk for him before he was nominated as his replacement. So it seemed like it fit. Brett Kavanaugh was the right choice to replace Kennedy. He's kind of like an ideological child to Kennedy. They both had that same mindset of, mostly leaning right on issues, but on occasion you'll see them fall in with the left leaning justices. Okay, so Kavanaugh was the perfect choice to replace Kennedy. Again, not packing the court, and then but the Democrats again very upset about this concept of keeping the court as it were. Um, Decided to throw a bunch of charges at Brett Kavanaugh. They found people to make fake accusations against him, and they had a basically a trial for an incident that supposedly happened when Brett Kavanaugh was a teenager. There was no evidence. It was all well, there was evidence. There was evidence he didn't do it, that he wasn't there, that he didn't do it. But there was no evidence that he did it. It was just all a matter of one person saying he did it, and then maybe some stories. And so they tried to use that to cause him to not be placed on the Supreme Court. It didn't stop him from being placed on the Supreme Court, and so he is there now currently. Again, that's the right choice. He should be there. He was the perfect person to replace Kennedy, and yeah, so there he is, not packing. Again, not packing the courts. Okay, next, Trump got a third justice. Mind you, in 4 years, that is a lot of justices to be able to put on the Supreme Court. But he didn't do anything wrong or illegal to make that happen. In fact, if anything, this is really Democrats' fault. Ginsburg, in particular, her fault. Ruth Bader Ginsburg could have retired at any time during Obama's presidency. He was president for 8 years. Could have retired. She was up there in age, and she could have retired and let Barack Obama replace her as president. Why didn't she? Well, there is a good a good possibility is because she assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. She wanted to have Hillary Clinton replace her as the first female president, replacing a female Supreme Court justice. Not the first, mind you. People get that make a mistake on that all the time. Let me see if I can confirm. I'm pretty sure Sandra Day O'Connor was the first. Sandra Day O'Connor. Yep, pretty sure Sandra Day O'Connor was the first female Supreme Court justice. Just looking at past Supreme Court justices, Reagan. Oh, looking back on it though, it's kind of interesting. Reagan nominated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like he got 5 Supreme Court justices put on the Supreme Court. Looks like maybe one was a temporary one though. Yeah, maybe. Or he nominated one and he didn't get seated, maybe. Anyways, yeah, it looks like maybe Bork got rejected. Okay, so he got 4 on there. Still 4, quite a bit. Okay. Yes, that looks like that's what happened. Okay, so anyway, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not the first female, but she was a female Supreme Court justice. She wanted Hillary Clinton, the first female president, to replace her, so she tried to hold out until Hillary became president. Keep in mind, going all the way back, Hillary was running against Obama in their primary. A lot of people thought Hillary was going to win that primary, but Obama beat her and then became president. And so I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg probably held a grudge on that. That's my take on it. Held a grudge for 8 years while Obama was president. Tried to hold out until he was no longer president so that Hillary could be the president. And then when Hillary lost, we had already had the current situation going where the Senate was not going to allow Merrick Garland to be seated in Scalia's seat. So she wasn't going to retire. If If Scalia hadn't passed away, I think that once it was determined that Trump was going to win the presidency, I think Ginsburg would have retired to allow Obama to replace her. I think that was probably her plan. But once she realized that the Senate was not going to fill the seat with Obama's nominee, yeah, I think that's probably what happened. Trump became president. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wanted to hold out to see if she could wait. Unfortunately, and I do mean this unfortunately, she passed away. I am not happy about the fact that she passed away. That, you know, even though she had lived a long life, but unfortunately she passed away. And so Trump comes in, and Trump is going to nominate someone to replace her in an election year. I mean, then the Republicans have to come in and make themselves look foolish and say, well, but he could be president. He could still be president. He might win this election, so it's totally not the last year of his presidency. You fools. You made yourself look stupid. In the end, it didn't matter, but you made yourself look dumb because you then went ahead and approved his nominee for the Supreme Court in the last year of his presidency, and he became the president. And he got Amy Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court. Also, keep in mind, Ginsburg was probably one of the furthest left-leaning justices, and Amy Coney Barrett is now one of the furthest right-leaning justices. So I get it. I get the anger with that situation. It is kind of her fault, kind of Ginsburg's fault, but I get why they are upset. And I get why they're upset at Republicans in the Senate for basically being hypocrites, but there you are. Amy Coney Barrett was placed on the Supreme Court, not packing, because Ginsburg passed away. The seat opened up. The president nominated someone, all straight and legit, and then the Senate approved that nomination, which is their power and authority to do so. And yeah, that is not packing the courts. It may seem like foul play. It may seem like something that you are not a fan of. You don't support it. If Merrick Garland had ended up on the Supreme Court, I'm sure Republicans would have been upset about it in the reverse. You know, so yes, that is how that all played out. But again, that's not packing the Supreme Court. What the Democrats want to do is pack the Supreme Court. What they want to do, now let's get all the way into this. What they want to do is they want to go in and add 4 more seats to the Supreme Court. Is that unconstitutional? No, it is not unconstitutional to go in and add 4 new seats to the Supreme Court. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. Nothing unconstitutional about doing that. I'm not saying it's unconstitutional. I'm saying it's a bad idea that has been historically deemed as inappropriate and as one of the leading causes to the downfall of our society if it happens. The last time the Democrats tried to do it, I don't believe the Republicans have ever done it, but I could be wrong on that. But the last time the Democrats tried to do it was while Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was dissatisfied with the Supreme Court, basically backhanding him and sending his precious laws back to him, saying they were unconstitutional. Supreme Court did that multiple times. He said, if you do it again, I'm going to pack the court. His party, the Democrat Party at the time, was like, no, you're not. We are not doing that. That is inappropriate. We're not going to do that. I think the Supreme Court ended up caving on that next ruling anyways. So he didn't push the issue. His party didn't support the issue, and so they didn't move forward with packing the court with 4 more people. Okay. There's that. Okay. So back then, Democrats knew it was a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Because then all of a sudden the Supreme Court becomes just another wing of whatever political party is in charge in the White House and in the Congress. So let's say that Biden gets to nominate 4 new justices to the Supreme Court, and that somehow the Democrats are able to force them through the Congress, get them placed on the Supreme Court, and then all of a sudden, instead of I think right now it's considered a 5-4, or is it a 6-3? I think it's a 6-3 technically. Roberts is really hit and miss, so technically it's a 6-3 court, I believe. So he would be able to put 4 more people on there, and so it'd become a 7-6 Supreme Court in favor of Biden getting anything he wanted approved through the Supreme Court. So that's why they want to do it. So then Biden loses to Trump, probably, in 2024. Well, all these Supreme Court justices are already there. So Trump, and this is kind of a thing I want to get into a little bit more here a little later. But so as of right now, Supreme Court justices have lifetime appointments. Okay, so lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices means that the next president can't just come in, most likely, theoretically, can't just come in and say, okay, those 4 new Supreme Court justices, I'm booting them off the Supreme Court. We're putting it back down to 9. We're getting rid of the 4 most recent, going back down to 9. I would tell them to try, see what happens. But they do, technically speaking, have lifetime appointments, so that might be a thing where it's like, okay, you can reduce the size of the court to 9, but the justices that are there currently have lifetime appointments, so you just won't replace the next 4 justices. So it could be that could be the result of that, basically saying until we are down to under 9 Supreme Court justices, then there will be no replacing Supreme Court justice moving forward, and that'd be a big bad thing too. That would be extremely bad. The other thing he could do is just go in and say, okay, well, they put 4 new justices on, I'm going to put 4 new justices on. All right, so now all of a sudden, instead of a 7-6, you have a 11-7. Not 11-7, 10-7. 10-7? Yes, 10-7. I can do math. I'm actually pretty good at math. That was terrible. Anyways, so now you got a 7-6 or 10-7 rule court, right? And then the next Democrat wins, and he comes in and he puts 4 on there, and all of a sudden it's an 11-10 court. And it just keeps going and going and going, so that they can have whatever they want pushed through the Supreme Court. And all they have to do is make sure they put 4 more Supreme Court justices on the court, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And it's just basically another House of Representatives or another Senate or whatever you want to call it, right? And we then have nothing that actually balances the government based on what the Constitution says. It's just all political parties at that point, political power. Okay, so that's why it's a bad thing. So it's not just a bad thing for Republicans. It's not just a bad thing for conservatives. It's not just a bad thing for right-leaning people. It's a bad thing for everybody, because it just will continue to happen. It won't matter who's in power. Whoever's in power can do the same thing. Okay? So don't think that they can, unless they can somehow go in, say, okay, let's add 4 more. Let's get a constitutional amendment passed that limits the Supreme Court to 13 people. Now, if they could do that, okay, yeah, all right, you got me. You got me on that one. You put the new Supreme Court justices. You set a constitutional limit to how many justices are supposed to be there. And there it is. But you'd have to pass a constitutional amendment to do that. Just passing a law won't do that. Okay? So let's talk about passing constitutional amendments. There's a compromise here that I think everybody could agree with. The compromise is a term limit. So when you think of term limits, typically speaking, how many times can you run for the same office? Right now there's only a term limit on presidents. They can run for office twice. Well, technically 3 times in a situation where, well, they didn't run for office the first time. They can run for office 2 times. There you go. If they take the office after the midpoint of the prior term, say Kamala Harris took office, she could still run for president two more times because it's after the midterm. Anyways, okay, so there's a term limit on presidents. We've talked a lot about term limits on Congress. Strongly support that. I think that should happen. In fact, it could be part of this constitutional amendment, right? Supreme Court justices, their term is lifetime. They don't have to run for multiple terms. They don't run at all. They get nominated and they get appointed. Okay, so when you talk about a term limit, instead of saying you can be the Supreme Court justice only twice, you can be the Supreme Court justice for 20 years or whatever the term ends up being, right? Some people want it to be an age. I don't think that works. I think that you shouldn't be Supreme Court justice until you turn 80, and then that's it. I think that the length of time is the better option. So basically, you're the Supreme Court justice for 20 years or 25 years or whatever it ends up being, 15 years, whatever the people decide, right? And so that would help a lot. It would make it so that you don't have Supreme Court justices staying on the Supreme Court until they die. You won't have the situation that you had with Ginsburg. You would have Supreme Court justices, and you would know when they need to be replaced, right? And so it would kind of play into our elections, right? Hey, this Supreme Court justice is going to have to retire in this year. This person is running for president. If they win, they will be able to replace the Supreme Court justice. Do you want this president replacing the Supreme Court justice or this president? So that's how that would kind of work. It would cause Supreme Court justices to leave the Supreme Court early in some cases, but some of them are very young, so they'll be there quite a long time. If we set age, so instead we say term limits, or a term limit, so they can only be the Supreme Court justice for 20 years, no matter how old they were when they took the position. They could have been 70. They can be Supreme Court for 20 years. They'll be 90. And if you die while you're a Supreme Court justice, then obviously you would be replaced at that point, and then the term would be for 15, 20 years, whatever it ends up being. Or they would do it similar to what we were talking about with the presidency. They would say you would finish the prior term, and then if you were nominated and appointed, then you would get your 20 years after you completed the prior Supreme Court justice's term. That could possibly be built in too. So they could do that, and then they could say that the Supreme Court justice. So right now, let's see here. Let's take a look. The justices that have been on the Supreme Court the longest. Is it Thomas? We have Thomas, Alito, and Roberts, I think. All right, so let's go back here. Thomas, Alito, and Roberts. I think it's Thomas, though. Thomas was placed on the court in 1991. Roberts was placed on the court in 2005. Yeah, so and then let's see, the other one was Alito. Alito was placed on the court in 2005. Yeah, so Thomas, by far, Thomas has been the longest. So it was Thomas, and then Ginsburg, Breyer, and then Roberts. Yeah, so there was a big gap. Okay, so it would be Thomas, and hey, Thomas has been on the court going on 40, no, 30, 32 years. Let's see, it's 2023, 1991. Yeah, 32 years. Okay, so Thomas has been on the court for 32 years. If we say that there is a term limit, we would also need to, it would need to be determined, how you would handle this existing justices. Do they still keep their lifetime appointment and it's from any nominees from then on? That's something that would need to be figured out. Okay, so a term limit would be an option to try to resolve this issue. The next option, the other thing that the term limit could do is it could be bundled with term limits for Congress. And if they were willing to bundle all that together, then we could get term limits all together and we could prevent these lifetime appointees in Congress too. I know they keep getting elected over and over again, but same thing. And then the other thing is you could say, okay, term limits for everybody, and we will bundle that with an increase to the size of the Supreme Court. That's a compromise. And that's a possible constitutional amendment that I could see happening. You could say, and so here's the one of the arguments that I saw. There, at the time that we had 9 Supreme Court justices, there were 9 district courts, okay, or federal district courts. Now there's 13, okay? There's 13 federal district courts. We should have 13 Supreme Court justices. Okay, I don't quite think that justifies it, but I see your argument. Okay, but we've got to cap it. We're not going to, every time there's a new district made, we get a new Supreme Court justice. No, we got to put a cap on this because it could just be the other way. Just say, okay, well, we'll just keep splitting, making new districts, so we have to make a new Supreme Court justice ad infinity, right? No, let's just say, okay, we'll go up to 13 Supreme Court justices if we get a term limit on Supreme Court justices and we get a term limit on Congress, or term limits on Congress. Bundle that all up into a constitutional amendment. I bet you could get the support of enough support to actually pass a constitutional amendment. And that's what I think is the solution going forward. You would have to get the details worked out. You'd have to get the support going. But that's what I see needing to happen. This packing the court is a bad idea just through a law passed by Congress. Hopefully they don't get that passed. I don't think they will. Republicans are in control of the House, so I don't believe that they can. So they're just saying it right now. All right, so tell me what you think. This was a longer video than I was expecting, but I like that. I like going in depth on a topic like this. I still do want to get back to the topic of a national divorce. Every time I try to do a video on that, I kind of don't feel like I have the wording right, and I just kind of stop and move on. So I think I really need to kind of quote unquote script it. But I do plan on doing more videos on that in the coming near future. I also want to do a joining video, which is basically talking about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the constitutional amendments. And then I would also discuss how that would be impacted in how that would be used and how that would be impacted in a national divorce. All right, let me know what else you guys want me to talk about. I love this. This is a lot of fun. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.